Egypt, Babylon, Greece, and Rome rose and fell in spectacular fashion, each leaving their monuments, armies, and empires carved into the record of time. And yet, woven quietly through the fabric of their stories, there was another people, smaller in land, fewer in numbers, yet unmatched in their influence over trade, culture, and even the spiritual imagination of the ancient world. They did not build massive pyramids, nor leave behind sprawling conquests, but their ships ruled the seas. Their letters became the foundation for much of the world's alphabets, and their merchants carried ideas and goods farther than any before them. To their neighbors, they were known as cunning traders, skilled craftsmen, and, at times, dangerous idolaters. The Bible speaks of them both with awe and condemnation. These were the Phoenicians, a seafaring people who connected the ancient world and, in ways that may surprise you, still shape our world today. The Phoenicians were not an empire in the traditional sense. They were a collection of independent city-states, strung like jewels along the narrow coastline of what is now Lebanon, parts of Syria and northern Israel. Chief among these were Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, names that still echo through biblical and classical writings. While other civilizations of the time invested heavily in vast armies to dominate land, the Phoenicians looked to the horizon and saw opportunity in the sea. They became master shipbuilders and navigators, exploring and establishing trade networks that stretched from the eastern Mediterranean to the Atlantic coasts of Africa and Europe. By the time the Greeks were learning to sail, the Phoenicians had already ventured beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, into waters most of the ancient world considered too dangerous to cross. What made them so successful wasn't brute force, but the art of connection. The Phoenicians linked distant cultures through commerce, introducing new goods, ideas, and technologies wherever they traveled. They dealt in luxury items prized by kings and temples, fine textiles dyed with the famous Tyrian purple, glassware of extraordinary clarity, timber from the cedar forests of Lebanon, and intricate metalwork. Their purple dye, so costly to produce that it was worth more than gold, became a symbol of royalty in civilizations from Mesopotamia to Rome. Even in the Bible, the cedars of Lebanon and the merchants of Tyre are spoken of with a kind of reverent recognition, underscoring the Phoenicians' role as purveyors of the finest materials. The earliest biblical references to these people often come under the names of their great cities. Sidon, for example, is mentioned as early as the book of Genesis in the Table of Nations, Genesis 10:15, where Sidon is named as the firstborn son of Canaan, making the Sidonians part of the broader Canaanite lineage. In Judges 10:6, the Israelites are condemned for turning away from the Lord to serve the gods of Sidon, among others, a nod to the Phoenicians' polytheistic worship that included Baal and Astarte. These deities, particularly Baal, became infamous in Israelite history as persistent rivals to the worship of Yahweh. One of the most famous biblical connections to the Phoenicians comes through King Hiram of Tyre. In 1 Kings 5, Hiram allies with King Solomon, supplying the cedar and cypress timber, as well as skilled craftsmen needed to build the first temple in Jerusalem. This partnership between Israel and Tyre stands as a rare example of political harmony in the ancient Near East, born from mutual benefit. For Solomon, it meant access to the finest building materials and artistry. For Hiram, it secured trade routes and strengthened his own city's prestige. The Bible even preserves the cordial words between the two kings, with Solomon acknowledging Hiram's friendship to his father David. In this, we see the Phoenicians not only as traders, but as diplomatic players, capable of forging relationships that spanned faiths and cultures. But the biblical portrait is far from flattering in all respects. Prophets like Ezekiel and Isaiah speak with sharp condemnation of Tyre's pride and wealth. In Ezekiel 27, Tyre is described in lavish detail as a magnificent ship laden with every conceivable luxury, crewed by skilled sailors from all over the known world. Yet this description serves as a prelude to a lament, because in the prophet's vision, Tyre's wealth becomes its undoing. Ezekiel 28 goes even further, portraying the king of Tyre as a figure of arrogance, likening him to a being in Eden, clothed in precious stones, until pride led to his fall. In Isaiah 23, the prophet calls for the mourning of Tyre, declaring that the Lord will humble her despite her far-reaching influence. These passages frame the Phoenicians as both admired and envied, but also as a warning against the corruption that can come with great wealth and worldly success. Outside the biblical texts, the Phoenicians' legacy is perhaps most clearly seen in their alphabet. While other ancient scripts, like Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform, were complex and often reserved for scribal elites, the Phoenicians developed a streamlined writing system based on sounds, an alphabet of 22 characters. This innovation made literacy more accessible to traders and ordinary citizens, and it spread rapidly through their trade networks. The Greeks adapted it, adding vowels. From there, it evolved into the Latin alphabet we use today. In this sense, every time we write a sentence in English, or in most European languages, we're touching the legacy of the Phoenicians. Their contribution to the written word is one of the most profound cultural gifts in human history. The Phoenicians' reach was astonishing for their time. Archaeological evidence and ancient accounts suggest that they established colonies across the Mediterranean, including Carthage in North Africa, which itself would become a powerhouse rival to Rome. Their ships carried tin from the British Isles, silver from Spain, and exotic goods from Africa. The Old Testament hints at some of these far-flung ventures. In 1 Kings 9:26-28, we read of Solomon's fleet at Etzion-Geber, manned by Phoenician sailors who brought back gold from Ophir, a location still debated by scholars, but believed to be far beyond the Red Sea, perhaps in Africa or southern Arabia. This suggests that the Israelites relied on Phoenician seamanship to access wealth otherwise out of reach. Yet their dominance of the sea did not mean they were invincible. The Phoenicians' city-states were fiercely independent and often competed with one another, which left them vulnerable to larger empires. Over time, Assyria, Babylon, and later Persia would dominate the Phoenician coast, forcing them to pay tribute or serve imperial interests. The famous Siege of Tyre by Nebuchadnezzar II, described in part in Ezekiel's prophecies, lasted 13 years. Though Tyre managed to hold out, it was a costly ordeal. Centuries later, Alexander the Great would succeed where Nebuchadnezzar had failed, building a causeway to reach and conquer the island city. Culturally, the Phoenicians were deeply religious, with rituals that shocked and horrified their neighbors. The worship of Baal and Melkart sometimes involved child sacrifice, a practice strongly condemned in the Hebrew Bible. Archaeological findings at Carthage, a Phoenician colony, suggest that such sacrifices may indeed have been part of their religious life, particularly during times of crisis. This aspect of their culture contributed to the lasting negative image in Jewish and later Christian thought, where the sins of Sidon, or the pride of Tyre, became shorthand for idolatry and moral corruption. Still, the Phoenicians were also admired for their artistry and craftsmanship. The descriptions of Solomon's temple in 1 Kings 6-7 highlight the Phoenician craftsman Hiram of Tyre, a different Hiram from the king, who fashioned the bronze pillars, the great basin known as the Sea, and numerous other temple furnishings. These works combine technical skill with aesthetic beauty, leaving a mark not just on Israelite architecture, but on the visual culture of the region. Over the centuries, their influence became so deeply embedded in the ancient Mediterranean that even as their political independence faded, their cultural legacy endured. The Romans admired Phoenician engineering and navigation. The spread of their alphabet continued to shape languages. Their role in transmitting goods, stories, and technologies across vast distances cemented their place as one of history's great connectors. Even in the New Testament, we find echoes of the Phoenicians' presence. In Matthew 15:21-28, Jesus travels to the region of Tyre and Sidon, where a Canaanite woman begs him to heal her daughter. Despite the cultural and religious divide, her persistence moves him to grant her request. This moment, though brief, is significant. It reminds us that the peoples of the Phoenician coast were still part of the living world of the Bible, and that their interactions with Israel and its faith continued into the Roman era. The story of the Phoenicians is a reminder that history is not only shaped by conquerors and kings, but also by those who sail between worlds, those who trade, translate, and transform cultures through connection. They were at once praised and vilified, partners and rivals, innovators and traditionalists. Their cities may have crumbled, their ships long since rotted away, But their imprint on language, religion, and commerce is indelible. If the Egyptians were the builders, the Babylonians the lawgivers, and the Greeks the philosophers, then the Phoenicians were the connectors, the ones who carried the threads that wove those worlds together. And perhaps that is why they continue to fascinate us, because their true empire was not built on land, but on the open sea, and in the enduring ties they forged between distant shores.